it can take a really long time to build that trust, build that rapport, to show people that you have ethics and integrity and all that stuff. And it can take a second to destroy all that.
Welcome to Altar of the Demo Gods. If you're wondering what advice from two experienced sales engineers sounds like, it's a little like this.
Welcome back to Altar of the Demo Gods. I'm Keith Wilson, joined by my co-host, John Morton. John, how you doing tonight?
Hola tostada.
Ahoy, hoy.
I'm working on my Duolingo. I need to learn another language, Keith. So hola tostada seemed appropriate.
Yeah. Not very advanced either. You must have just started.
I don't know. This might be next level. You know, my Mandarin Chinese is pretty bad, so I went with the Spanish.
Yeah. Spanish seems to be more practical. Mandarin, sure, I guess, is if you want to order Chinese food, like...
Oh, yeah, good point. We normally don't do business with the Chinese, but, you know, Mexico, we have. One time I was down in Aguascalientes, Mexico, and they were shocked. I didn't know Spanish. Even dropping hola tostada did not go as expected.
I had a hard time getting, this was years ago, I had a hard time getting an Uber in South Florida because I couldn't speak Spanish.
They would call. They would animal unto itself.
They would call. I had 3 drivers in a row that called me, would only speak Spanish, and as soon as we got off the phone, they'd cancel the ride.
You didn't. Donde está biblioteca? Just drop it on them. You got to go to the library, Keith.
But I needed to go to the aeroporto.
There you go, man. I think you could. Let's go back in time.
Not la biblioteca.
Donde está la aeroporto? You know, we got some Spanish listeners that I want to bring on this show because I am excited to hear their experiences, right? Trying to translate between like what we do technically in English to like Spanish.
Yeah.
I've been in those meetings like in Aguascalientes. I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is amazing. But anyways, I always make it back to the airport.
Anyway, so last week we were talking about, what were we talking about, John?
We were talking about rapport and trust.
Yes, building trust and rapport in sales engineering. That's correct. So with that, I kind of summarized it. My summarization at the end was, John uses a great phrase, and it's authentic curiosity, right? Like genuinely having questions about your customer, particularly the problems that they have and the problems that you're trying to help them solve, right? And then focus on that problem. Everybody knows you're there for the money. That can go unsaid. You don't have to act like you're there for the money. You can just focus on solving the problems and the money will come. John, was there anything you wanted to bring back or point out from last week's episode?
Yeah, just my favorite. Do not be robotic. People are automatically turned off, and a quick way to destroy trust and rapport is that robotic process of reading a script. So try to be, a genuine human being. Even as weird as that may sound, you may be shocked at the results.
Yeah, and in building trust and rapport, we talked about some kind of general themes that ran throughout that, right? We talked about charisma being just a little piece of it. Words like authenticity came up. Curiosity. What was another one? Integrity, which is what we're going to get into tonight. Reliability. Those sort of themes that came.
Showing up, being consistent. Yeah, just, human being.
And integrity is a big one. So I want to redefine integrity for this. And integrity is doing the right thing when nobody's looking, right? When nobody cares, particularly if it's advantageous for you to do the wrong thing and you still do the right thing. That's integrity, right? And I guess that we start getting into a philosophical discussion now, right? Because that integrity comes from a combination of beliefs in different morals and ethics and things that you've gathered throughout your life, where I think ethics tend to be more of a defined thing. Integrity seems to just kind of be a collection of people's feelings.
Or a Socratic Greek, philosophy integrity, where you're right, ethics is very well defined. Matter of fact, Keith, there's two things I like to tell people you can get fired for in a sales role. And in my experience, these are those two things. Number one is cheating on your expenses. You will definitively get fired. And number two, failing to do your routine training, which includes ethics training, right? So it's very clear ethics is defined.
Or, breaking those ethical, sometimes the ethical and legal blend together.
Yes.
Generally, if you work in somewhat of a sales production or sales organization, you're going to get, I don't know if they do this outside of software sales or startups, but I know I have to sign something every quarter saying that I didn't receive any kickbacks, that everything was accurately reported, things like that. I'm not sure what the regulations are that require that. But if I were to receive kickbacks, not only that, if I were to receive kickbacks, so if I were to receive kickbacks on its own, that's integrity, right? That's a question of my integrity.
I was just saying,
if I fail to report those kickbacks, that's even possibly a breach of ethics. Now, if I fail to report that, I'm guessing, I don't know this because I'm not a lawyer, I'm guessing that's where it crosses the legal line.
Yeah. So in the sales world, in the corporate world, I get it, right? In the political world, I'm not so sure. So my giggling and laughing was aligned with that because I don't know if politics aligns the same way. Why do I say that? I like to say in sales, I like the word ambassador. We're more like ambassadors for a corporate entity. Yeah. But now you got me questioning it, Keith. Because in our world, in corporate world, there are very clear lines. Legally, you do this, you will be punished. Politically, they're a little different. So maybe ambassador is not a good word. But to your point, ethically, there is routine training and it is reviewed regularly. So there's attestations and certifications, things like if anybody's in software, I don't know, probably other mandates. There's compliance mandates like SOC 2 type, like SOC 2 compliance. It means, is everyone in a capacity to sell software, have they done ethics training? It's like a requirement. Yeah. Do they understand the legal boundaries of what they're doing? So you're right, Keith. There are very clear delineations.
Well, I almost feel like it. I almost think of it like when you go to the eye doctor and they adjust it, right? And it gets a little bit more clear. Like we can almost think of it that way, right? Integrity is probably less defined than ethics, which is a bit more defined, which then channels to legal, which is very well defined.
Right, back to my point about getting fired. You cheat on your expenses or you cheat on your training, which includes ethics. Those are clear delineations of legality.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just cheating too. Like, if you're the type of person that cheated in school, you're probably going to continue to and if you face no repercussions for it, you're going to continue to do that until you feel some sort of repercussions.
Right.
This is not the way to feel those repercussions, right?
This is a bad situation.
Yeah. I mean, well, and so it's really hard to build a good reputation. We talked about trust and rapport in the last episode. So again, I'm just going to fly this out there. If you didn't listen to that one, maybe go back. It can take a really long time to build that trust, build that rapport, to show people that you have ethics and integrity and all that stuff. And it can take a second to destroy all that. Just with one ethical misstep or legal misstep. I even had a CEO that would say, we're going to do everything we can to win as long as it's legal, moral, and ethical. I had some questions about the morality and ethics. It was definitely legal for sure. The ethics were good too. I think I had some questions about the morality and the way that we did things, but immorality, that's another level, right? That's beyond integrity. That's built into our core beliefs. And that is even fuzzier and less defined for and agreed upon, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What I view as moral is going to be different than what John views as We agree on most things, but
I'll give you a use case, man. So like, I've run the gamut of different organizations who I've worked for, who I've sold to. And for the most part, I don't know, this would be a good survey question for our customer, our audience. How many of them have ever sold anything internationally? So like normally when you sell in your territory, and it could be as small as like I live in Denver and I sell only in Denver, but it could be I sell in the Rocky Mountains, which includes like Utah, or it could be I sell in the U.S. But once you cross international borders, to Keith's point, things get a little interesting. So case in point, I'll give you 3 examples, not sequentially or in any order, but to Keith's point. Selling through Brazil, they have this entire system when it comes to cybersecurity where they have this third-party setup where based on encryption laws that were established by the Americans, a third-party entity has to interrogate everything that you're selling into Brazil. Now, it sounds like on the surface, right, it makes sense, but all that means is there's this third-party organization normally owned by somebody's cousin who's a member of the political entity there in Brazil who interrogates your hardware or software for compliance.
This isn't just Brazil, by the way. Brazil is just a good example.
That's just one example.
Yeah.
The other is places like China, where the ethical training I've had, where to Keith's point, what is legally different in the United States is radically different to the Chinese. And it's like the legal boundaries are so different, it's almost radical. Yeah. Last case, in India. I sold to the Indians, in India, different companies. And I'm like, hey, man, normally we don't buy people boats in the United States to make a deal happen. But sometimes that's just the way it gets done. So the boundaries between moral, ethical, and legal are so interesting depending on your role and what you're doing in the environment. You just kind of have to go by your own limits, to Keith's point of integrity. So to me, integrity lays on the top. If you don't want to get engaged in these things, and I'm not saying Brazil's a bad country or China or India, whatever, man, you take it for what you're worth. That's where integrity comes into play in saying, do I want to participate in this or not?
Yeah.
And then you balance out those other things.
I think anybody who's done like logistics before may get what we're saying. And I've never done logistics, but I know people that used to have to do like RMAs when hardware was a thing. Now everything is in the cloud, so it's not as big a deal. But and we had to keep a separate warehouse in South America just so we could get people devices within a couple of days as opposed to a couple months, right?
Right.
Because of those things. But yeah, he would tell me all the time, I think people think in America, if an official takes a bribe, they're going to go to jail, which is true, which should be true. If they're caught, they're going to go to jail, right? In other countries, that's just the way things are done. That's the way that government works.
Maybe this is a good time to remind people of that time I went to Aruba. And I swear it's related. I went to Aruba. They say, hey, I'll allow it. The judge says, and they're like, hey, if you just give us, I don't even know the dollar price. It's in the hundreds. If you give us hundreds of dollars, we will make going through customs very easy for you. All you have to do to go to Aruba, and I also went to Jamaica and Turks and Caicos, give us hundreds of dollars, and when you come to our country, we will give you an expedited service through customs. Now, anybody who's come through America and you think about border control and this, and that, you're like guys with guns and, they're interrogating your bag. And I go to these countries and literally one guy's like, are you Mr. John? They have a nice little iPad with my name on it. And I literally walk out the gates of customs. I don't go through any metal detectors. I don't go through any scanners. And it's not illegal. I'm not saying anything I did was illegal. It's just how they operate. To Keith's point, what's normal to them is not normal to us, right?
No.
So,
well, and that now we're getting off into the legality of things, particularly in international. That I think that's way out of scope for this, but definitely interesting stories. And I don't have a ton to tell. I'm retelling stories of other people. We'd have to get some other folks on here. But like I said, let's do a kind of a side-by-side comparison of
Okay.
an organization that works to a high ethical standard with integrity, the positive effects that organization is going to experience, maybe even some negative effects, versus an organization that is maybe a little bit more flexible with their integrity and their morals. Right. So let's start with the first one. Right. So as practice, we teach in our sales training and in our orientation to every person that comes through. So taught in orientation, reiterated in sales training, that we hold everyone to a high ethical standard. We don't believe in lying, cheating, stealing. You do what's best for the customer. You work in the best interest of the company. You're honest and transparent and all those things. That carries out into your sales, right? And those people work with customers and start building trust and rapport very quickly, right? And also start building the reputation of your business. You'd want to talk about brand, right? Building and maintaining a brand and brand image, right? If the image of your organization is one of high ethical standards, of people that do the right thing for the customer, whether the customer knows it or not, that's a huge benefit for that organization. John, what other benefits can you think of for them?
Yeah, I think, well, just first and foremost, it's like a personal smell test too. So everything we've talked about, in your gut. And this is what I think of when I think of ethics, back to your own personal morals. Is this acceptable for me or not? What most organizations try to do is just remind you of what that is, right? So in that same vein, right, if it's one-sided, any deal, if you're losing exponentially or they're losing exponentially, whatever it may be, that's probably, you got to think about that a little bit. But again, it's kind of that initial smell test of what's the benefit, what's in it for anybody. That's where I kind of feel like you should know. Now, there should be some coaching. Keith's point. What does good look like? We always know that, right? Good looks like we're not ending up as headline news. We're ending up as everybody won and we solved the problem. We're legitimately trying to work within the bounds of whatever they're in to get to where we're at. Just establishing that, or even thinking that way philosophically, like, I'm not trying to take a quick paycheck with a quick deal. Where's that at on the ethical scale? If you can ask yourself that and you feel like, I don't care, maybe you need to take a step back, right? But if you're like, hey, this is win-win, maybe here's where we're at, It's always tricky, Keith, and I'm just being honest, and I think anybody who's listening to this, if you've never been in this situation, you got to prepare yourself for it. So at least if you have some boundaries and guidelines by which to guide yourself, that's a good thing. It's not easy, man.
Particularly if there's a lot of money on the line, right?
Oh, goodness sake.
Let's
say $1 million paycheck to you on the line, you are genuinely going to be questioning your own ethics and morals definitively.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are.
Let's say we take that same organization. They've hired a new seller who's taken the training, and they work there, and they've so, up until this point, they've shown themselves to be ethical and moral and to have high integrity. Now they have a deal that they could personally make $1 million off of, life-changing money.
Yeah, W-2 $1 million for you. Yeah.
$1 million for this deal, and the company's going to stand behind it too because they have integrity, right? That's why another positive benefit of this is people want to come work for that company because they're known for having integrity, right? It's very easy for them to recruit because they know that that company doesn't stiff their salespeople, right? Because they preach integrity. So he comes in and he's getting ready to close the deal, and he gets to the executive buyer, and the executive buyer says, listen, my guys love this thing. I'm going to buy it, but I'm not going to get anything out of it. What can you do for me? What do you do as that guy?
Right. Hey, man, at least he didn't say, maybe you can buy me a boat to help me out. But
yeah, I mean,
one thing I recommend,
this stuff generally isn't going to be as obvious, especially if they've done it before. it's not going to be as blatant as buy me a boat to make this work. It's going to,
Right.
it's going to be
What can you
suggested.
do for me? Well, one of those things, and yeah, man, so there's going to be dilemmas no matter what, man. I mean, just in sales generally, you can be out one night at a bar, chatting it up with somebody, and you have this same ethical dilemma. The point is, like, one thing I like to think is, and this is one of my personal things I like to leverage is, can you have somebody you can call as like your golden compass of decision making, right? And it's not a great answer, but
So
it's
don't trust yourself is what you're saying.
right. Hey, Keith knows me, man. I don't trust myself, right? Like I get into some interesting.
I wouldn't
situations.
trust myself with that much money. I would question my judgment for sure.
I definitely would, right? Because you're thinking about, so is there some person, and I like to think both professional and, in a non-professional way, that you can bounce it off of and just see what they say, man. Don't take what their feedback is like negative, but you would hope sales leadership in this role would say, hey, have we crossed all the T's, dotted all the I's, made sure everything's right? That's one, professional capacity, but also in a personal capacity, man. Even if you got a group of friends or even one person you trust, even your wife, your significant other, whatever they may be, I don't care, just somebody you intimately trust personally, I think it's okay to kind of run it by them. Ask them, what would you do in this situation, right? So at least you can gather additional data to help you out, because it is truly a dilemma, dude, that transcends time. Nobody's figured it out. So don't think you can do it alone.
So here are some things, some themes that I heard running throughout what you just said. One of them being transparency, right? If you're open and honest with your sales leadership from the beginning and you tell them, listen, got this deal, obviously it's going to make the company a ton of money. And you involve more people, and it's much harder to be shady in the light. And you can quote me on that. Put that one on social media.
Oh, I love that one.
Right?
I'm marking that.
Yeah. It's much more difficult to be shady in the light, right? So the more light you can shine on it, the more people that actually have a say that mean something to it, know about it, the less likely it is that you're committing some sort of integrity violation. The other piece of that, and it kind of locks into it there, is accountability, right? If I'm transparent about what I'm doing, you can hold me accountable for what I'm doing, right? If I tell you this happened, and I've told multiple people, and even just a fraction of them have come back and said, yeah, we can't do that. We got to find another way to do this, right? Then you have to, right? You have to make that decision to pull back and go, all right, we're going to at least hit pause for now. But it makes you accountable. If you go forward, you won't, because there's going to be people that'll know now, like, well, I've already told them this person said right? You've already locked yourself into where if you go forward, you're being held accountable. If it's been determined to be something that is going to be some sort of a violation of ethics, laws, whatever. Right. So, yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Being transparent and having that sort of accountability, and that just means involving other people.
Yeah,
whether that's
don't fail alone, man.
Whether that's somebody
don't win
you trust,
alone and don't fail alone.
Yeah, whether that's somebody it's just that you're close to, that you trust, or it literally is the sales leadership that's involved in the deal. Like, they should know too. Like, if something like that happens, you really should report it pretty quickly, because the quicker you drag that into the light, the less shady you're going to look.
Keith's motto there.
I'm gonna keep hitting on this till it's on a t-shirt, John.
And I hope everyone appreciates this, right? Keith and I are just waxing poetic about something honest, man. There's no way to have the right answers, because I'm telling you right now, anybody listening, I can't give you the answer for your situation, but it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
I mean, it's all
some guardrails.
There's so much gray area when it comes to this, because, like I said, because it's so undefined. Until we get to legal. Like, legal is
matter of fact.
Yeah. I mean, and chances are, like, if you bring something like this up through your leadership, your company's general counsel will probably also have something to say about it as well, right? Like,
yeah. Because that's better to have on your side than not, just being honest.
Yeah. So the result of this, we gave all the good things. What are some of the negative things that come out of this, right? Say I go ahead and I go forward with the deal. Now I've brought the integrity of this company into question because word gets out. Like all of a sudden, Gary, the CTO, just got this new $150,000 boat, and he don't make that much. Like he makes good money, but it's a small town, right? And it's a regional bank. So he doesn't make like brand new $150,000 out of nowhere boat money, right? He just finished paying off the minivan.
Literally.
Yeah.
With his 3 kids,
Yeah.
his wife trying to get him to private school.
So
I always look at examples like Enron.
Yeah, so word gets out. And now what happens? And like not even legal, right? First of all, you've now opened the floodgates to any sort of crooked executive buyer that's crooked. Again, we're not going to get into the moral discussion, but any sort of executive buyer that's looking to extract something, they know they can get it out of your company now, right? So that's obvious problem number one. But there's bigger problems than that.
Yeah.
Let's take it back to the recruiting problem, right?
Oh yeah.
If I know that your company is willing to do that, where is your line? How do I, you haven't stiffed salespeople before, because that happened, by the way, right? Salesperson gets a gigantic commission. The company goes, we're not going to pay that. The salesperson quits, and the salesperson has to sue them to get the money. That happens.
Yes.
Pretty frequently. Like more frequently than it should, right?
One more interesting tidbit here, Keith, for anybody who's listening, maybe they haven't been there, maybe they have. Rules exist because somebody messed up. That's what we used to say in the Navy. We used a little bit more aggressive language, but what does that mean? For anybody who's ever tried, and this is a fact, this supports the ethical dilemma and the lessons learned, so learn from this. Anybody who's ever tried to sell into finance or tried to sell into Fed, SLED, or higher ed, why can't you buy them more than a $25 gift? Has anybody ever really thought about that? If you try to send them a gift card, a bottle of whiskey, you try to take them out to a dinner, they have this threshold of $25. It may be different now, but this is what I knew it as. It's because of that. It's because literally in these situations, those organizations have been found guilty of some crime. So they've set a standard. They said, look, Keith, your limit is $25. I know you like John Morton. I know he's solving your problem. But if you accept the gift of more than $25 from him, we're going to hold you accountable. It's because of this ethical, moral things that have come up across time. So it's there, if you look at it in the real world, to Keith's point. And those are some of the negative ramifications. So not only are you going to be branded with recruiting, but now you can't even go to a basketball game for a team you like because some vendor invited you because of these sort of ethical dilemmas. So yeah, ramifications can be long-standing.
Yeah. I mean, it's, it's going to, it really, so all it takes is just one sort of crack and the whole thing cracks open to where people begin to question your integrity, right?
Yep.
It kind of goes, the old saying, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. So if I can't trust you to stand behind your company and the integrity that your company is supposed to produce, how do I know where your line is? You become too unpredictable for me to want to do business with, right?
Yeah, and as a representative of that org, how can I trust the org too? Not just you, but your organization. So I think we could continue to talk about this, Keith. It's an interesting topic for sure. I don't hear anybody really talk about it, so I'm glad we kind of broached it, and I would love to hear people's feedback on this. Even anonymous. Nobody wants to be called out on this topic specifically, so that's a good one.
Honestly, we need an ethics professor, somebody who understands this at a philosophical level, if we really want to get into it. But I think for our audiences, and this is great now because this is the point where we summarize the show anyway, there's just some key takeaways here, having morality, having integrity, understanding the legality of which you work in, and trying to work for companies that do the same, have many positive benefits. So it's just good practice to do it. And I mean, you don't get that feeling either. I don't know if anybody's ever told a lie before that's listening.
No way, Keith.
No, not our listeners. Obviously, everybody's told a lie at some point. And unless you're a sociopath, you feel some sort of guilt with that. Now, imagine that compounding guilt, right? And it just gets worse, right? So you're gonna feel better. In order to help you maintain a level of high integrity, be transparent, because you can't be shady in the light. John, what do you have to say for this episode?
Can't be shady in the light. I'm getting a T-shirt with that on it. No, man, I go with the basics too, like the smell test, man. Go with the smell test, right? Does this feel right or it doesn't? And sometimes that's exciting. So guess what? Don't trust yourself. Bounce it off somebody else. You know, you may be caught up in the moment thinking this is going to be a great experience, but bounce it off somebody else who maybe doesn't have as much skin in the game, and take what they're saying just matter of fact, right? Don't take it personally. So there's certain ways to balance out that, but to Keith's point, integrity is always the key. At the end of the day, when you go home and, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, you look back on it, can you say I did the right thing? That's kind of what matters, overall, morally and ethically. So,
yeah, this was an interesting episode. We're both way too sober for this sort of philosophical discussion. So I think whenever we do get to a point to where we do a live recording, we'll never do a live show. Our audience will never be that big because we're so specific. But there's a good chance John and I will meet up at a bar somewhere and record, right? Maybe we revisit the subject then. Yeah. So if you think that
an ethics professor,
we'll get them drunk too, as long as that's ethical. If that sounds interesting to you, make sure you like, share, subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. If you want to listen to us as a podcast, you can listen to the audio version on this anywhere you get your podcast. If you need somewhere specific, you can get the links to everywhere that we're on by going to demogodspod.com. That's where you can get everything Alter the Demo Gods. If you have questions for us or think you'd be a good guest on the show, maybe if you're an ethics professor that happen to be listening to the show, you can email us at demogodspod@gmail.com. That's demogodspod@gmail.com. Well, like I said, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was an interesting topic, something that's not conventionally, that you don't really conventionally think of when you're working as a sales engineer. Ethics they're important, but they're not always top of mind. So, if you thought this was interesting, we'll see you here next week on Alter of the Demo Gods.